大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 有一个人，他用毕生的精力只做了一件事。他说，从大学读书以来，60年中只做一件事，那就是反省中华民族的文化生命，以重开中国哲学的途径。这个人就是牟宗三，20世纪最伟大的中国哲学家之一，现代新儒学的集大成者。今天我们要走进这位哲学巨人的世界，看看他如何用东方的心灵去读懂西方最难读的哲学家康德，又如何把2000年的儒家智慧重新搭建成一座气象万千的思想大厦。1909年的6月12日，山东栖霞县一个叫穆家团的小村庄里，牟宗三诞生了。栖霞这个地方有山有海，胶东半岛的风土滋养了无数读书人。牟家虽不算显赫，但家学渊源，从小就培养了穆宗三嗜书好学的习惯。9岁入私塾读书，11岁进新制小学，15岁入栖霞县立中学。一个少年就这样一步步走向更广阔的天地。1928年，19岁的穆宗三考入北京大学预科，2年后升入哲学系。1933年正式毕业。北大哲学系是什么地方？那是当时中国思想界最顶尖的聚集地。穆宗三在这里遇见了2个改变他一生的人，一个是金岳霖，中国最严谨的逻辑学大师。牟宗三跟着他学逻辑，学会了用精密的思维工具来分析问题。另一个人更关键，那就是熊十力。熊十力是谁？他是20世纪中国哲学界的奇人，一个从佛学出发，后来重归儒学，建立了新唯识论体系的巨匠。熊十力见到年轻的穆宗三之后，曾经说过一句非常罕见的话。他说，北大自有哲学系以来，唯牟宗三一人可造。这是何等高的评价！要知道北大哲学系培养出多少了不起的人才，熊十力却独说，只有牟宗三一人可造。这个评语后来果然被历史所印证。熊十力的著作让穆宗三受到了极大的震撼，那种从生命深处翻涌出来的儒学精神，在穆宗三心里埋下了种子。师生2人此后维持了几十年的深厚情谊。1948年的夏天，熊十力乘轮船途经南京，牟宗三和唐君毅登上轮船，长跪迎接恩师。这一幕在中国现代学术史上传为佳话。大学毕业之后，穆宗三的人生进入了一段漫长的流浪岁月。他先后在山东乡村师范、广州学海书院，后来又辗转到了华西大学，再到中央大学、金陵大学、浙江大学，到处讲授逻辑学和西方哲学。那是一个动荡的年代，战争、迁徙、离散，穆宗三就在这样的时代洪流中，带着他的书，带着他的思考，走过了大半个中国。这段流浪的岁月并没有让他沉沦，反而让他想得更深。他开始意识到一个问题，中国的传统文化为什么在近代陷入危机？面对西方文明的冲击，我们究竟应该如何回应？这个问题后来成为他整个学术生涯的核心问题。1949年，历史翻到了新的一页。穆宗三随着时代的变迁来到了台湾，先在台北师范大学任教，后来又到了东海大学。此后几十年，他的足迹遍及台湾和香港，在台湾大学、香港大学，在香港中文大学新雅书院，他的课堂座无虚席，他的声音回荡在整个华人学术界。说到新雅书院，这是一个非常特别的地方。1949年之后，一批饱学之士带着对中国文化的责任感，在香港创办了新雅书院。国学大师钱穆是其中的灵魂人物，唐君毅、牟宗三也先后加入。他们要在香港这块小小的土地上守护中国文化的火种。1958年，发生了一件意义深远的大事。牟宗三和唐君毅、徐复观、张君迈4位现代新儒家的代表人物联名发表了一篇宣言。这篇宣言的题目是《为中国文化敬告世界人士宣言》。这份宣言是现代新儒学的纲领性文件，它向全世界宣告， 中国文化有其不可磨灭的价值，中国哲学在这个时代依然有其存在的理由和贡献。这份宣言发出的时代背景，是中国传统文化受到全面质疑的年代，西化派和全盘西化的声音此起彼伏。在很多人眼中，中国的旧文化已经是包袱，应该全部丢弃，而牟宗三他们偏偏逆风而行，说不，中国文化有它的根本，有它的精神，这个精神不能丢，也丢不了。现在让我们谈谈牟宗三哲学最核心的几个概念。先说他最重视的一个词，道德的形上学。什么是道德的形上学？简单说就是从道德意识出发，去说明万物存在的根源。儒家的核心是什么？是人，是良知，是内心那个能够判断善恶的道德主体。牟宗三认为，这个道德主体不只是一种心理现象，它背后有一个深刻的形上学基础。也就是说，人之所以能有道德，能知善知恶，是因为人的心灵深处有一个本体性的存在。儒家把这个叫做良知，或者叫天道。这个想法和西方哲学形成了有趣的对话。西方哲学的巨人康德，他也非常重视道德。康德说，道德不依赖于上帝，不依赖于利益，道德是纯粹理性的命令，是绝对的律则。牟宗三觉得康德说得很好，但还不够深。康德的哲学体系有一个地方让牟宗三不太满意。康德说，人类没有质的直觉，也就是说，人不能直接认识物自身，不能直接把握万物的本体，我们只能认识现象。但牟宗三说，儒家的传统告诉我们，人有良知，良知就是一种质的直觉。孟子说的四端之心，王阳明说的致良知，这些都是人直接感知道德本体的能力。所以在这一点上，中国哲学比康德走得更远。中国的道德哲学有其独特的深度，是西方哲学所没有的。这个论点在学术界引发了很多讨论，有人赞成，有人反驳。但不管怎样，牟宗三提出这个问题的方式，本身就是一个了不起的贡献，因为它让中西哲学真正开始对话，不是拿西方的框架来解释中国，也不是闭门造车只说中国，而是两个传统真正平等地交锋。接下来说一个更重要的概念，良知的自我坎陷。这是牟宗三最有创意的思想之一，也是他最努力要回答的那个问题。为什么中国有深厚的道德文明，却没有发展出民主和科学？牟宗三的答案很独特。他说，中国的道德主体太强了，儒家的良知直接往内圣的路子走，直接要成圣成贤，这没有问题。但因为太急着往内圣走，就没有停下来让理性往外展开，没有发展出认识外在世界的知性主体，也没有发展出参与社会治理的政治主体。所以牟宗三说，良知需要自我坎陷。坎陷这个词来自易经，意思是向下沉，良知向下沉，才能从道德主体转出知性主体，才能从道德意识开出民主与科学。这就是他说的由内圣开出新外王。这个理论听起来有点复杂，但核心思想其实很亲切。他在说，中国传统的道德精神是我们最珍贵的资产，但我们不能停在这里，要让这个精神在现代世界开花结果，就必须往外走，往制度走，往科学走，往民主走。这是一个充满时代感的哲学，不是躲在书斋里的学问，而是要回应时代的呼声。现在来说说牟宗三的另一个伟大贡献，他独立翻译了康德的三大批判。康德的三大批判是什么？是纯粹理性批判，是实践理性批判，是判断力批判。这三本书是西方近代哲学的顶峰，也是哲学史上最难读的著作之一。即使是西方学者读康德都觉得很吃力，更不用说翻译了。但牟宗三做到了，而且是一个人完成的。他把康德的三大批判全部翻译成中文，这项工作的难度难以想象，需要对康德哲学有极深的理解，需要对中文有极高的驾驭能力，还需要积10年如一日的毅力。有人问牟宗三， 为什么要翻译康德？他说，因为要了解西方哲学，就必须了解康德。要让中国哲学和西方哲学真正对话，就必须认真读懂对方。牟宗三翻译康德，不是崇洋媚外，恰恰相反，他是要用最严格的方式去了解对手，然后才能找到中国哲学的位置，才能清楚说出中国哲学哪里超越了康德，哪里还需要补足。这种做学问的态度令人敬佩。他不是那种凭一点皮毛就大放厥词的人，他要把对方的最深处都吃透，然后才说话。让我们来看看牟宗三的几部重要著作。《心体与性体》是他最重要的哲学史着作，这部书共3册，他系统梳理了宋明理学的脉络，把周敦颐、张载、程颢、程颐、朱熹以及陆九渊、王阳明等人的思想一一加以辨析。他提出了很多有创见的判断，比如他认为程颐和朱熹的路子是别子为宗，是走偏了的一支，而陆象山和王阳明才是儒学正脉。这个判断在学术界引发了很大的争议。朱熹的地位在儒学史上极其崇高，牟宗三却说朱熹走偏了，这需要很大的胆识。才性与玄理是研究魏晋玄学的力作，佛性与般若则是他对佛学的深入探讨。现象与物自身和圆善论是他哲学体系最成熟的表达。在圆善论里，他回应了康德关于至善问题的讨论，提出了中国式的至善理论，牟宗三最精彩的一套课程，后来整理成了《中国哲学19讲》。这本书至今仍是学习中国哲学最好的入门读物之一。他用生动的语言，把中国哲学的几个主要传统逐一加以介绍和比较，儒家、道家、佛家，深入浅出，让很多原本觉得哲学很难懂的读者开始爱上中国哲学。说到牟宗三的课堂，那真是一个传奇。听过他上课的学生都说，牟先生讲课不看讲稿，从头到尾口若悬河，思维敏锐，时而慷慨激昂，时而沉思默想。课堂里常常有学生被他的热情所感染，不自觉地热血沸腾起来。他的学生后来也都成了大学者。刘树先和杜维明在英语世界积极推广儒学，让现代儒学走向了国际舞台。李明辉继承了牟宗三的康德研究传统，在台湾和德国都享有盛名。这些学生的成就，是牟宗三留给后世最重要的遗产之一。1974年，65岁的牟宗三从香港中文大学退休，但退休对他来说只是换了一个教书的地方。他继续在新雅研究所担任导师，继续到台湾大学讲学，继续写作，继续思考。1987年，香港大学授予他名誉文学博士学位，这是对他一生学术成就的肯定。在他80大寿的时候，学生们为他办了盛大的庆典。他笑着说那句话：60年中只做了一件事，反省中华民族的文化生命，重开中国哲学的途径。这句话说得多么坦然，多么豁达。一个人一生能有这样清晰的方向，能够60年如一日地做一件事，这本身就是一种伟大。1995年4月12日，牟宗三在台北国立台湾大学医学院附设医院辞世，享年87岁。那一天是个春天的日子，台北的空气里还带着花香。一位哲学巨人就这样安静地离开了这个世界。英国剑桥哲学词典这样评价他：当代新儒家他那一代中最富原创性与影响力的哲学家。这个评语来自西方最严肃的学术机构，是对牟宗三最高的国际认可。牟宗三的思想告诉我们什么？首先，他告诉我们传统不是包袱，传统是资源。2000年的儒家智慧不是陈年旧货，而是可以和最现代的西方哲学平等对话的深厚底蕴。其次，他告诉我们真正的汇通不是拼凑，不是把儒家和康德随便混在一起说说而已，而是要深入到两个传统的核心，找出他们真正的异同，在最深的层次上发现问题，然后提出真正原创的答案。第三，他用自己的一生告诉我们，做学问需要的不只是聪明，需要的是持久的热情。 需要的是60年如一日的专注，需要的是不追名逐利，只问学术良心的纯粹。今天的世界变化越来越快，知识越来越碎片化，很多人觉得深度的哲学思考是奢侈品，是没有用的东西。但牟宗三的存在提醒我们，有些问题永远不会过时。人是什么？道德从哪里来？文化如何在现代世界存活？这些问题，今天比任何时候都更需要认真回答。牟宗三穷一生之力，搭建了一座桥梁，连接东方与西方，连接古代与现代，连接内圣与外王。这座桥梁，至今仍在，等待着每一个愿意走过去的人。谢谢你今天陪我走进牟宗三的世界。如果你也被这位哲学家的精神所感动，欢迎留言告诉我你的感想，也欢迎订阅沉思者 J。 下次我们继续一起探索那些改变世界的伟大心灵。我们下次见咯。 Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There was a man who spent his entire life doing just one thing. He once said that from the time he was a university student, for 60 years he did only one thing. That was to reflect on the cultural life of the Chinese nation, and to reopen the pathways of Chinese philosophy. This man was Mou Zongsan, one of the greatest Chinese philosophers of the 20th century, and the crowning figure of modern Neo-Confucianism. Today we step into the world of this philosophical giant, to see how he used an Eastern mind to comprehend Kant, the most difficult philosopher in the Western tradition, and how he rebuilt 2,000 years of Confucian wisdom into a magnificent and intricate edifice of thought. On the 12th of June, 1909, in a small village called Mou Jiatuan in Qixia County, Shandong Province, Mou Zongsan was born. Qixia sits where mountains meet the sea. The landscape of the Jiaodong Peninsula nurtured countless scholars over the centuries. His family was not particularly prominent, but they valued learning deeply, and from an early age Mou Zongsan developed a voracious love of reading. He entered a traditional private school at age 9, moved to a modern elementary school at 11, and enrolled in Qixia County Middle School at 15. Step by step this young man was moving toward a much wider world. In 1928, at 19 years of age, he was admitted to the preparatory program at Peking University. 2 years later he advanced to the Department of Philosophy, and graduated in 1933. The Department of Philosophy at Peking University was no ordinary place. It was the intellectual heartland of China at that time. There Mou Zongsan encountered two men who would change his life forever. The first was Jin Yuelin, China's most rigorous master of logic. Under Jin Yuelin, Mou Zongsan learned to use precision thinking as a tool for philosophical analysis. The second man was even more transformative. That was Xiong Shili. Who was Xiong Shili? He was the most remarkable figure in 20th century Chinese philosophy, a thinker who began with Buddhist thought, then returned to Confucianism, and built an entirely original philosophical system known as the New Treatise on the Uniqueness of Consciousness. When Xiong Shili met the young Mou Zongsan, he made a statement that was extraordinarily rare coming from him. He said, "Since Peking University established its philosophy department, Mou Zongsan is the only student truly worth cultivating." What an astonishing evaluation. Think about how many brilliant minds passed through the Peking University philosophy program. Yet Xiong Shili singled out only one, and history would prove him completely right. Xiong Shili's writings struck Mou Zongsan like a thunderbolt. That spirit of Confucianism rising from the very depths of lived experience planted a seed in Mou Zongsan's heart. The two maintained a profound bond of teacher and student for decades. In the summer of 1948, Xiong Shili was traveling by boat through Nanjing. Mou Zongsan and Tang Junyi boarded the vessel, and knelt before their beloved teacher in greeting. This scene became one of the most cherished stories in modern Chinese intellectual history. After graduating from university, Mou Zongsan entered a long period of wandering. He taught at Shoujiang Rural Normal School in Shandong, then at Zuheishu Academy in Guangzhou, then moved on to Huaxi University, Central University, Jinling University, and Zhejiang University, teaching logic and Western philosophy wherever he went. Those were turbulent years. War, displacement, separation. Mou Zongsan carried his books through the upheaval, traversing half of China with his thoughts for company. Yet this wandering life never broke his spirit. If anything, it deepened his thinking. He began to wrestle with a profound question. Why had Chinese traditional culture fallen into crisis in the modern age? How should it respond to the challenge of Western civilization? This question would become the central concern of his entire scholarly career. In 1949, as history turned a new page, Mou Zongsan followed the tide of events to Taiwan. He first taught at Taiwan Normal University, then moved to Tunghai University. Over the decades that followed, his footprints covered both Taiwan and Hong Kong. At National Taiwan University, the University of Hong Kong, and the New Asia College of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, his classrooms were always full. His voice resonated throughout the entire Chinese academic world. Speaking of New Asia College, this was a very special place. After 1949, a group of deeply learned scholars, driven by a sense of responsibility toward Chinese culture, founded New Asia College in Hong Kong. The great classicist Qian Mu was its spiritual center. Tang Junyi and Mou Zongsan joined as well. Together they aimed to keep the flame of Chinese culture alive on this small patch of land called Hong Kong. In 1958, something of profound significance took place. Mou Zongsan joined forces with Tang Junyi, Su Fuguan, and Zhang Junmai. For representative figures of modern Neo-Confucianism, they jointly issued a landmark declaration. Its title was a manifesto to the world on behalf of Chinese culture. This document served as the defining statement of modern Neo-Confucianism. It declared to the whole world that Chinese culture possesses an enduring and irreplaceable value, that Chinese philosophy still has a valid role and contribution to make in the modern age. The backdrop to this declaration was an era of sweeping doubt about traditional Chinese culture. Voices calling for wholesale westernization or complete rejection of the old ways were everywhere. For many people, traditional Chinese culture was seen as mere baggage, something to be discarded entirely. And yet Mou Zongsan and his colleagues walked against the wind. They said no. Chinese culture has its roots, has its essential spirit. That spirit cannot be abandoned, and will not be lost. Now let us turn to the core concepts of Mou Zongsan's philosophy. First, his most central idea, the moral metaphysics. What is the moral metaphysics? In simple terms, it means starting from moral consciousness, to explain the ultimate ground of the existence of all things. What is at the heart of Confucianism? It is benevolence. It is the innate moral knowing. It is the moral subject within each person that can distinguish good from evil. Mou Zongsan argued that this moral subject is not merely a psychological phenomenon. Behind it lies a profound metaphysical foundation. In other words, the reason human beings can be moral, can know good and evil, is because at the deepest core of the human mind there exists something fundamental. Confucianism calls this the innate moral knowing, or the heavenly way. This idea enters into a fascinating dialogue with Western philosophy. The towering figure of Western philosophy, Immanuel Kant, also placed enormous emphasis on morality. Kant said that morality does not depend on God, does not depend on self-interest. Morality is the command of pure reason, an absolute and unconditional law. Mou Zongsan felt that Kant had said something wonderful, but not deep enough. There was one aspect of Kant's system that Mou Zongsan found insufficient. Kant said that human beings do not possess intellectual intuition. That is to say, humans cannot directly know the thing in itself, cannot directly grasp the ultimate nature of things. We can only know phenomena. But Mou Zongsan said, the Confucian tradition tells us that human beings do have innate moral knowing. And innate moral knowing is precisely a form of intellectual intuition. Mencius spoke of the four moral sprouts within every person. Wang Yangming taught the extension of innate moral knowing. These are all expressions of the human capacity to directly perceive the moral ultimate. So on this point, Chinese philosophy goes further than Kant. Chinese moral philosophy has a unique depth, one that Western philosophy does not possess. This argument generated enormous discussion in the academic world. Some agreed, others pushed back. But regardless, the very way in which Mou Zongsan framed the question was itself a magnificent contribution, because he enabled a genuine dialogue between Chinese and Western philosophy, not using Western frameworks to explain China, nor retreating into pure Chinese thought alone, but allowing two great traditions to meet and engage as equals. Now let us turn to an even more important concept, the self-negation of innate moral knowing. This is one of Mou Zongsan's most creative ideas, and it addresses the question he labored hardest to answer. Why did China, with its rich moral civilization, not develop democracy and science on its own? Mou Zongsan's answer was uniquely original. He said that China's moral subject was perhaps too powerful, Confucian innate moral knowing aimed directly at inner sagehood, directly toward becoming a sage of perfect moral character. This in itself is not a problem, but precisely because it moved so urgently toward inner cultivation, it never paused to let reason unfold outward. It did not develop a cognitive subject to understand the external world, nor did it develop a political subject to participate in governance and institutions. So Mou Zongsan argued, innate moral knowing needs to undergo self-negation. The term self-negation comes from the Book of Changes. It means to sink downward. When innate moral knowing sinks downward, it can transform from moral subject into cognitive subject. It can evolve from moral consciousness to open out democracy and science. This is what he called deriving a new outer kingship from inner sagehood. This theory may sound complicated, but its core insight is deeply relatable. It says, the moral spirit of Chinese tradition is our most precious inheritance. But we cannot stop there. If we want this spirit to flourish in the modern world, we must move outward, toward institutions, toward science, toward democracy. This is a philosophy deeply engaged with its own time, not a retreat into the study room, but a response to the urgent call of history. Now let us speak of another towering achievement of Mou Zongsan, his solo translation of Kant's 3 critiques. What are Kant's 3 critiques? They are the critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, and the critique of judgment. These 3 works represent the summit of modern Western philosophy, and they are among the most difficult texts in all of philosophical history. Even Western scholars find Kant extremely challenging to read, to say nothing of translating him. Yet Mou Zongsan accomplished exactly this, and he did it alone. He rendered all 3 of Kant's critiques into Chinese. The degree of difficulty involved in this undertaking is almost impossible to overstate. It required a profound understanding of Kantian philosophy, a supreme command of the Chinese language, and the sustained discipline of decades of work. Someone once asked Mou Zongsan why he chose to translate Kant. He said, because to understand Western philosophy, you must understand Kant, and for Chinese philosophy to enter genuine dialogue with Western thought, you must first truly comprehend what the other side is saying. Mou Zongsan's engagement with Kant was not admiration for its own sake. Quite the opposite. He wanted to understand his interlocutor in the most rigorous way possible. Only then could he clearly identify where Chinese philosophy stands. Only then could he articulate where Chinese thought surpasses Kant, and where it still needs to develop further. This scholarly attitude commands deep respect. He was not the kind of thinker who speaks loosely from a superficial acquaintance with a subject. He insisted on absorbing the deepest layers of what he studied, before he opened his mouth to respond. Let us look at several of Mou Zongsan's major works. The work titled Essence of Mind and Human Nature is his most important contribution to the history of philosophy. In 3 volumes, he systematically traced the lineage of Song and Ming dynasty Neo-Confucianism, examining in detail the thought of Zhou Dunyi, Zhang Zai, Cheng Hao, Cheng Yi, Zhu Xi, Lu Zhuoyuan, and Wang Yangming. He advanced many original and bold judgments. For example, he argued that the approach of Cheng Yi and Zhu Xi represented a branch that had deviated from the main line, while Lu Zhuoyuan and Wang Yangming represented the true orthodox tradition of Confucian learning. This judgment created enormous controversy in the academic world. The stature of Zhu Xi in the history of Confucianism is extraordinarily high. Yet Mou Zongsan said that Zhu Xi had gone astray. This required tremendous intellectual courage. The work titled Talent, Nature, and Metaphysical Mind is a masterful study of Wei Jin-era metaphysics. Buddhist Nature and Prajna is his deep exploration of Buddhist thought. Phenomenon and Thing in Itself and On the Summum Bonum represent the most mature expression of his philosophical system. In the work On the Summum Bonum, he engaged with Kant's discussion of the highest good, and proposed a Chinese answer to the problem of ultimate goodness. Mou Zongsan's most celebrated series of lectures were later compiled into the book known as 19 Lectures on Chinese Philosophy. This book remains one of the best introductions to Chinese philosophy available today. In vivid and accessible language, he presented and compared the major traditions of Chinese thought, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, one by one, with depth and clarity. Many readers who once found philosophy intimidating found themselves falling in love with Chinese thought after reading this book. Speaking of Mou Zongsan's classroom, it was truly legendary. Students who attended his lectures all recalled that Mou Zongsan never read from notes. He spoke from beginning to end with total fluency. His thinking was razor sharp. At times he would become fiercely passionate. At other times he would pause in deep contemplation. Students were often swept up in his intensity. Without quite knowing why, their hearts would begin to race. His students went on to become great scholars in their own right. Lu Shuxian and Du Weiming became active champions of Confucianism in the English-speaking world, bringing modern Confucian studies to the international stage. Li Minghui carried forward Mou Zongsan's tradition of Kantian scholarship, earning recognition in both Taiwan and Germany. The achievements of these students represent one of the most important legacies Mou Zongsan left for future generations. In 1974, at the age of 65, Mou Zongsan retired from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. But retirement for him simply meant changing venues for teaching. He continued as a supervising professor at the New Asia Institute, continued lecturing at National Taiwan University, continued writing, continued thinking. In 1987, the University of Hong Kong awarded him an honorary doctorate in literature. This was a recognition of a lifetime of scholarly achievement. On the occasion of his 80th birthday, his students organized a grand celebration in his honor. With a smile he repeated those words. For 60 years I did only one thing: to reflect on the cultural life of the Chinese nation, and to reopen the pathways of Chinese philosophy. How calmly and with what peace of mind he said those words. A person who can live with such clear direction, who can focus for 60 years on one single endeavor, that itself is a form of greatness. On the 12th of April 1995, Mou Zongsan passed away at the National Taiwan University Hospital in Taipei. He was 87 years old. It was a spring day, and the air in Taipei still carried the fragrance of flowers. A philosophical giant departed from this world in quiet dignity. The Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy described him as the most original and influential philosopher among his generation of contemporary Neo-Confucians. This assessment came from one of the most serious academic institutions in the Western world, and it stands as the highest international recognition of Mou Zongsan's life work. What does Mou Zongsan's thought tell us? First and foremost, he tells us that tradition is not a burden. Tradition is a resource. 2,000 years of Confucian wisdom is not an old relic gathering dust. It is a profound foundation that can engage as an equal with the most advanced Western philosophy. Second, he tells us that genuine synthesis is not a patchwork. It is not enough to loosely blend Confucianism and Kant together in general terms. You must penetrate to the core of both traditions. Identify their true similarities and differences. Discover the real problems at the deepest level, and then offer answers that are genuinely original. Third, through the example of his own life he tells us that scholarship demands more than brilliance. It demands enduring passion, 60 years of focused dedication, freedom from the pursuit of fame and profit, and the purity of following only one's scholarly conscience. The world today changes faster and faster. Knowledge grows more fragmented by the day. Many people feel that deep philosophical inquiry is a luxury, something without practical use. But the existence of Mou Zongsan reminds us that some questions never go out of date. What is a human being? Where does morality come from? How can a culture survive and flourish in the modern world? These questions are more urgent today than ever before. Mou Zongsan devoted a lifetime to building a bridge, connecting East and West, connecting the ancient and the modern, connecting inner sagehood and outer governance. That bridge still stands, waiting for every person who is willing to walk across it. Thank you for joining me today in the world of Mou Zongsan. If this great philosopher has moved you, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. And do subscribe to Thinker J. Next time we will continue exploring the magnificent minds that have shaped our world. See you next time.